Hello everyone! So we are going to be watching this quick lesson video. Again, we're still talking about section P7, all about equations. But this video is going to talk about how we solve quadratic equations, okay? Now in class, guys, what we just discussed most recently, we talked about quadratic equations and what they look like, in class, we focused on A, B, and C. So we've already reviewed how to solve equations with factoring, how to solve equations when we factor out a GCF, and using the square root property. Already reviewed those three examples. How about the last two? So we're going to complete our chart today, watching this video. And let's take a look at the last two things here if you want to complete your notes. So take those notes out from the Zoom session. And we're going to look at D and E in this video, okay? Let's first look at D, shall we? We're going to click over here. And D says, so something to look for, okay? When we see something getting squared, equaling a number. Okay, so here's some examples of what that means, or what that visually looks like. So here it says x plus 4 quantity squared equals 36, and another would be x plus 3 quantity squared equals 35. So when we're in that form, we kind of write it in general like this. So U represents that something getting squared equals D, that represents some kind of constant, some number. And what do we do? Let's definitely write down those two steps here. What do we do when we see something that looks like these two examples? First thing we want to do is take the square root of both sides. We want to remember, I'm trying to solve for that x. It's stuck inside those parentheses, right? So I need to get it out of the parentheses, and the first thing I need to do to get it out of the parentheses is going to be square root both sides, because we know square root and a power of squared, right? They're opposites, okay? They're going to reverse each other, undo each other. So if something's getting squared and I square root it, it cancels it right out, okay? And then I can focus on solving for x. So let's take a look at this first example. It says x plus 4 quantity squared equals 36. First thing I have to do, what we just talked about, take the square root of both sides. So that looks like that, okay? Big square root over x plus 4 squared and big square root over 36. I can simplify that. So what my left-hand side looks like is x plus 4. I'm going to write it over here. After I do that, it would be x plus 4 equals, what's the square root of 36? Square root of 36 is 6, and I have to remember I can also get a negative 36, right? There's two possible answers when we square root a number in an equation. Two answers, a positive and a negative of the square root, okay? So now it looks like that, and that's where I need to come in here and create two equations. If it's a perfect square, just like 36, 36 is a perfect square. Since it was a perfect square, I get another number, 6 and negative 6, and we need to create two equations. We need to say x plus 4 equals 6 and x plus 4 equals negative 6. Okay, they're both answers, right? 6 and negative 6 both will work in this situation. And then we just continue to solve this for x. So what do I need to do to both of these little equations to get those x's alone? Subtract 4, right? Subtract 4. So then I will end up with x equals positive 2 and x equals negative 10. And there I have my answers to the equation. And we could go check that and plug it right back in. Okay? But we have to be careful when we are square rooting something. We have to remember that I'm going to get two answers right there. Okay? Let's do the other example. Okay, the other example says x plus 3 squared, quantity squared, equals 35. Okay, first thing we do, get rid of that square, right? Take the square root of both sides. And now we are able to rewrite this as x plus 3 equals the square root of 35. Well, is 35 a perfect square? It's not, right? So when it's not, I just have to leave it as the square root of 35, right? Notice that square root symbol's in there. I can't simplify it at all, but I can't take away the square root. Notice that plus or minus symbol there. If you ever, don't feel like writing like 6 and -6, you could also write plus or minus 6. Okay, it's like math shortcut. So notice that plus or minus is in there because anytime we take the square root, we're going to have a positive and a negative when we solve equations. Okay, so I just continue to do my next step, get that x alone. I'm going to have to subtract 3 from both sides. And I'll be left with x equals that -3 that I'm subtracting. We write in the front. So that -3 plus or minus the square root of 35. And it's not a pretty answer, I know, but that is my answer and it's fully simplified. Okay? So if you have any questions, bring those to the Zoom class tomorrow. The last type of solving quadratic equations that we need to learn is this lovely method right here. I'm sure you've heard of before. Method E is solving using the quadratic formula. I love the quadratic formula. Oh my goodness. So let's hit it. Let's see here. How do I know when to use the quadratic formula? We use the quadratic formula when, what to look for, it is in that standard form. Something's in that standard form and it's not factorable. Well, usually when something's in that standard form, I'm going to be like, okay, cool, let me try to factor it, right? Because that's my go-to method. That's my A, right? My plan A here. But when I can factor it, I know I have to hit the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula, it is really a great formula as long as it is. But the best thing about the quadratic formula is after we solve it, it literally gives us x. It solves x for us. It says x equals, we're going to read this together, opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. There's a link in the week 5 folder for a song to remember that formula if you would like to listen to it. But anyways, what I think is really helpful here is to first, because we really need to know what our A, our B, and our C is, I like to go through and plan that. Okay, so here there's standard form, and here's the equation we are working with, x squared plus 4x minus 3. So what is our A, our B, and our C, right? I need to figure that out. Our A is whatever is in front of the x squared. So in this, what is in front of my x squared? It's actually a 1, right? There's a secret 1 there. My b is what's in front of the x, and my c is that last number. Notice that sign, okay? So I like to write that out. A is 1, b is 4, and c is -3. And now, guys, it's really simple to just take those 3 numbers and plug them into the formula, substitute them in. Okay, so let's start here. I have x equals, my opposite b. My b is 4. The opposite of a positive 4 is a -4. So that's why I have that negative in the front. Plus or minus b squared, so I have 4 squared, minus 4 times my a, which is 1, times my c, which is -3. All divided by 2 times my a, which is 1. Okay, and then we just simplify. When we simplify this, guys, we want to focus first on what's under my square root. Okay, so let's focus on that and this piece. Those two pieces separately first. So 4 squared we know is going to give me 16, right? And then I'm going to go and multiply. 4 times 1 gives me 4. Right? And then 4 times -3 gives me a -12. Okay? But then I have this minus sign right there, right? So when I subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. That's why I have a plus now under my square root. Okay? So just be careful. 4 times 1 times -3 gives me -12. And then a subtracted negative gives me a positive 12 there. I'm still focusing on simplifying what's under the square root. So 16 plus 12 gives me 28. So now it looks pretty simplified, but we can keep going. I have -4 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 2. Luckily, back in the beginning of this chapter, we learned how to simplify square roots. So I need to pull that square root off to the side and say, okay, square root of 28, I need to break you down with two numbers, two factors of 28, where one is a perfect square. So I came up with 4 and 7. Super great because the square root of 4 is going to give me 2. Okay, and I can't simplify square root 7 anymore. So this I want to rewrite in for my square root of 28. They're equal, one's just simplified. So now I have -4 plus or minus 2 square root 7 over 2. Okay, if you leave it like that, I'll have to take off a point or so, which is sad. I have to break this down. Okay, and how I break it down, the easiest way to see it for me personally is I separate this numerator over my denominator. So I write the -4 over 2 plus or minus 2 square root 7 over 2. So this is what that looks like, the -4 over 2 plus or minus the 2 square root 7 over 2. Okay, separate my numerator, keep them both over my denominator. And that makes it super easy for me to see, okay, -4 divided by 2 is going to be -2, and 2 over 2, that is going to cancel, and I'll be left with the square root of 7. Okay, the quadratic formula, it takes some time to really get used to, but you really want to make sure you break down the steps and go slow and take your time, and you will run into no problems at all if you do that. You guys rock, you can do this. Bring some questions to Zoom tomorrow. Awesome job.